Welcome back, everybody. You're watching Sport Federation TV, and of course, we keep talking about sport in the Western Cape across the 6 districts. Well, as you know, it has, of course, been the Olympics. Everybody's back from the Olympics, and a number of our codes in South Africa have, in fact, been to Tokyo to go and participate there. And of course, our Western Cape equestrian folks have been making us very proud. On the line with me now is a steward from Western Cape Equestrian Show Jumping, Chris Nessling. Chris, welcome to Sport Federation TV.
Thanks, JP. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think it's the first time for us to have you on the show. Chris, before we go to the big thing, which is of course the Olympics, where everybody has been talking about for the last, let's say 2-3 years now. You're of course a steward in show jumping Western Cape. Just give us a rundown. A steward. What does a steward do in show jumping?
All right. So when you see show jumping as a spectator, you would probably see about 2 minutes of the show jumping round that happens on the field of play in the arena. But there's quite a lot of that happens behind the scenes in terms of the preparation, the training, and looking after the horses. So essentially, the steward's role is to look after the welfare of the horse and to ensure that there is a level playing field for the athletes. So it all happens behind the scenes. And what you get to see is the 2 minutes that happens inside the arena.
So how do you look after the welfare of a horse?
Right. So at all these major events, the horses stay overnight. They stay in secure stabling. And so we will be an extra set of eyes for the grooms that are looking after the horses to ensure that they're well looked after. And for instance, where I was now in Tokyo, a lot of my job was during the night when there was no grooms around, and we would make sure that the horses had water during the night. They didn't kick over the water buckets, things like that. So we look after the welfare of the horse. We also look after the training arenas to make sure that everybody's training follows the rules, and that nobody's getting a competitive advantage, things like that. Yeah.
Now, you're a steward within the FEI, which is the International Equestrian Structure. Just tell us a little bit about that connection for yourself, Western Cape, Equestria, South Africa, all the way to an international level.
Right. So the FEI is obviously the federation that is above the South African Equestrian Federation, and they have got a education system which makes sure that officials all over the world have a consistent level of education, and that we all train the same, and that we all understand the rules the same. So no matter where you are, if you come together at an international event, all FEI stewards and judges will basically be on the same page.
Right.
We don't have many international shows in the Cape. There's a couple in Johannesburg, and I've had to go up to those, and I've also traveled extensively around the world doing international events.
So does the FEI ask you to travel and ask other stewards from around the world to travel and go and make sure that things are in order?
Yeah. So sometimes it starts with the organizing committee. Okay, the body that's holding the event. They would then ask for certain officials to work at those events, and then the FEI places certain officials at different events so that there's no sort of conflict of interest. There's always somebody who is completely separate from the organizing committee as well, and those are called foreign stewards or foreign judges.
But Chris, of course, the last few weeks, the last couple of months has been all about the Olympics. Just tell us a little bit about that. I mean, you've obviously been, and you've just told me before the show that you had to actually, in fact, get to Tokyo well in advance.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole trip, because of COVID, started a long time before we went to the Olympics. And, it got real when we did our 2 weeks quarantine before we left. We had to do a self-isolation. We had to do self-tests. There was a heap of paperwork. Um, Flights got cancelled. It was really touch and go until I arrived, which was 2 weeks before the actual Olympics started, because that's when the first horses started to arrive. And I was there from the arrival of the first horse. They were flown in batches. And for the first, say, 3 weeks, I worked at nights looking after the horses at night. And then when the show jumping started in the last week, I moved from night to day to start work in the training arenas, you know, which was in direct connection with my sport.
Absolutely, it must be. You must be exhausted. The amount of hours and time that must take. But I can tell you, Chris, that from our side, sitting on the other side of the world and looking at everybody obviously had their eyes glued to the screen, looking at the Olympics. The show jumping, excluding the fact that there were no spectators, obviously, but the equestrian events looked absolutely spectacular. The athletes, the horses, it really, it must be fantastic to be there.
Yeah. So as a steward, we don't get to see much of that because we were all behind the scenes the whole time. But I was lucky enough to see there is an incredible atmosphere, even though there were no spectators, because it is the Olympics, and there is, there's a vibe there like nowhere else.
Yeah.
I was lucky that I was able to see the jump off of the final team competition between USA and Sweden, and that was one of the most phenomenal jump offs that I've ever seen. It was absolutely fantastic sport. We couldn't have asked for better sport.
Yeah, I think that's one of the obvious first questions everybody always asks is, does your horse have to go with you? Do you have to travel with your horse, or is there a horse waiting for you? Because I think it's like a cyclist, you have to take your bicycle with you, and a surfer, you have to take your surfboard with you. But I would imagine for an animal, a horse, to travel, it's a much, much more complicated matter.
Yeah. So the horses, you travel with your horse, all right? The top horses in the world of show jumping are quite used to traveling from continent to continent by air.
Right.
So
by air.
They're fairly used to it. At the Olympics, they all arrived they did quarantines at various spots around the world, and they would fly in on a couple of flights. So every day we had a flight of horses arriving. It's actually quite an incredible thing to see. About 10 trucks arrived at once with the horses each time a flight landed. The horse goes with.
That's fascinating. I wouldn't have thought that they were actually flying. We normally think of animal travel happening on a ship, or maybe at best somebody with a poodle on an aeroplane, but a horse on an aeroplane. But Chris, Western Cape Equestrian, of course, final question, how are we doing as Western Cape Equestrian? Are show jumpers coming through the ranks?
Okay, so we can be very proud in the Cape, although we don't have a very big sport as such. We have produced some fantastic riders. Lisa Williams, who went to the World Equestrian Games 2 years ago, at the top of the game, and there's many more actually that started out in the Western Cape, and then as they developed in the sport, moved to Johannesburg, where basically the core of the sport is, and from then a couple have gone overseas as well. So we can be very proud of the riders that we have developed in the Western Cape.
Well, Chris, we're going to leave it at that, and we can say that we're very proud to have you representing Western Cape and South Africa at such a high level, at an international level. So to you and the team, congratulations, well done. We're thrilled to know that we're flying the flag for the province and South Africa internationally.
Thanks, JP.
There we go, folks. Chris Nessling is a steward at Western Cape Equestrian, show jumping. More than a little bit of time then spent at the Olympics, and wow. So exciting to see that show jumping's doing well, coming through the ranks, Western Cape, South Africa, onto the international level, and yeah, great stuff. Folks, we'll take an ad break. When we come back from the break, we carry on talking about sport in the province. Back in a sec.